So we're studying Christians and politics, and before we start into that, plug turkey trip to Asia Minor, ancient Asia Minor, this coming May. The early bird discount expires November 25th, so if you're interested in that trip, I'll put this slide up at the end with a QR code, and you can find information via that QR code, or you can go to my website, steppingintothejordan.com, and there's a little menu item called Study Trips, and that'll take you to all the information. So we're looking at Christians and politics, and just kind of a little bit of background. This is not a class about policies. This is not a class that's designed to support one party platform over another. This is not a class saying why Republicans are going to hell or why Democrats are going to hell. It's a class about how we engage in politics as Christians. And so we have been through a few things, and I wanted to just do a quick review to kind of help get us set for what we're going to talk about today. First, we looked in week 1 at this idea of the big sort, which is this idea that really for the last probably 80, 90, almost 100 years, we as a country have been gradually isolating ourselves within communities of like-minded people. And those like-minded groups tend to reinforce the ideas that they all have. They become little echo chambers within the neighborhoods that we live. And as a result, we are losing diversity. And we kind of experienced this a bit when we moved here to Allen, coming from Austin, which is a very, very different world if you haven't ever been to Austin. It's kind of like California in a lot of ways, but it is quite the place. And one of our neighbors, I think it's actually, one of the kids of our neighbors had a bumper sticker on his car out front that said, "Humans against Ted Cruz." And I thought, oh, that's kind of funny. And I found out later that one of our other neighbors didn't think it was very funny. They were not very pleased with that liberal New Yorker that had moved in next door with such a bumper sticker. So we see this sort of this compartmentalizing amongst our neighborhoods. We also looked at how, in terms of how we engage in politics, we need to be changing the way that we engage from the what to the how. And by that we mean instead of taking the what of politics, the ideologies, the policies, and the parties, and filtering that through the lens of Jesus, and focusing ourselves more on how we do politics, through spiritual values, through relationships, and through practices, and specifically looking at how we see Jesus engage through love, mercy, justice, truth, hope, and humility. And we talked about how Jesus very rarely, if at all, ever deals with the what of politics of his day, but he does engage with the how, even though people around him are all the time trying to engage him in the what. And he sidesteps it and instead focuses on the how. And the two that we're focusing on in this study are the hope and humility aspects. And so a couple of weeks ago, I had everyone take this self-assessment quiz. And if you haven't taken that quiz, you can scan that QR code. I know Jim gave it out last week as well for folks that hadn't taken it. It's a quick and easy little quiz that will kind of gauge where you stand on the axes of hope and humility. And I'll let those that are scanning with their cameras, you get it, before we move on. Got it? It worked? Cool. Okay. And so what it did is when you put this on the axis of hope and humility, then what you find is that there are these 4 quadrants that the authors of our book, Chang and French, have put together. And they've labeled these the combatant, the cynic, the exhausted, and the disciple. And the idea is, and we looked at how Jesus works with various groups of people to move people towards a high hope, high humility sort of mindset, which they call the disciple. And so last week, Jim looked at the combatant, which are those that are high in hope but low in humility. And I find myself in that category. And today we're going to look at, we'll talk first about the combatant. The combatants are those that, what we get from the combatants that is positive is this idea that we need the courage and steadfastness of the combatant to help Christians stand their ground. Okay? There's something good that the combatants have, which is hope. Okay? And they're willing to fight for it. What they lack is humility that they need to grow into. Today we're going to look at the opposite, which is the exhausted. Those who are high in humility and they are low in hope. Now, the exhausted are tired of the vitriol and the divisiveness. Just out of curiosity, who in here was part of the exhausted from their quiz? Okay, we get a few here. All right. They are too drained to bring their best selves into politics. They're just tired. They are probably the largest group among Christians. But they also, according to French and Chang, have the most potential for healing because they possess a high degree of humility. And so the question we have is, how can the exhausted grow in hope? And we're going to talk about a few practical things. But first I want to kind of look at how did we get here? What is contributing to the exhaustion? And one of the big things that contributes to the exhaustion is social media. And so we probably need to start with understanding the business model for social media. How do these companies make money? Because let's face it, they're in it to make money. They're not in it for public good. And they make money by selling advertising. And the advertising comes through how much their ads get viewed by individuals, and then how often people happen to click on that advertising. And so in order to get the most money from advertising, you need to maximize user attention by any means necessary. Well, how do you do that? They have learned that negative emotions drive higher time viewing. Fear, anger, disgust will keep you coming back. I can't believe they said that. Oh, that person, I can't believe it, right? So that sort of motivation drives higher rates of viewing. And what's worse is that if your response tends to go down, how do you get it back? More of the same. You ratchet it up. And so the result to sort of decreasing usage leads to increasing the negative emotions in the next round. And an adage that we all need to remember is that if you're not paying for it, okay, if you're not paying for Facebook, if you're not paying for Twitter/X, if you're not paying for Instagram or for TikTok or for whatever else social media that you're using, you are not the customer. You are the product. And that's what they bank on. On top of that, we have this phenomena of what's called the global news cycle. that came about when we went from having just the news in the newspapers or at the evening news or the morning news, but to having 24-hour news programs all the time, okay, that make money, right, that are there to make money. They sell advertising, and their goal is to keep viewers tuned in more. Keep viewers tuned in longer. And how do they do it? The exact same way. They feed off the negative emotions of fear, anger, and disgust. Breaking news. It used to be, I remember when breaking news was, would come on like, oh my goodness, something has immediately just happened. Something really bad we all need to pay attention to. I watch, when we're fixing dinner, I have ABC News turned on with David Muir. And every single newscast starts with breaking news. I'm sorry, it's just not breaking news if it's happening all the time. CNN, breaking news. I'm sure Fox News, breaking news. Everything is breaking news. So breaking news has changed from what it used to mean to what it means today, which is breaking in to say, hey, get my attention. And we've also seen that local events that normally would not garner any other attention but local attention get promoted on a national level, oftentimes faster than the reliable information on the event can come out. And it almost becomes kind of a mob mentality, right? Things are happening so quickly that the actual information about what's really been the case isn't available, and so it's getting filled in with assumptions, and those assumptions become facts. And we also see that because they become specialized, these channels become echo chambers for similar views. I was saw a friend post something on Facebook earlier this week of something related to the flooding in the Carolinas. And from what this person has read and what they've seen in whichever news channel they watch, you would think that the federal government had completely turned their backs and was doing nothing to help the people of the Carolinas and was leaving them to their own devices. And ironically, an image that she posted was an AI-generated image of a little girl in a boat with a puppy. Okay? Totally fake image. Total garbage. And yet, this person's news source tells her nothing is happening and these people are suffering. And yet I watch another news channel, it's like the governors of those states saying, we're getting all the help that we need, we're making progress, we're making headway, we're doing this, we're doing that. You know, it's a totally, which is it? Two separate perceptions of the same event, the same situation. The impact is, number one, it desensitizes us to suffering because we see so much. It increases pessimism. It reinforces the ideas of us versus them, which is effectively amplifying the big sort. And it results in a loss of hope. And the end result of a loss of hope is exhaustion. I'm just curious, how many people think that the times that we're living in today are the worst we have seen in the United States in terms of divisiveness? Okay?
Since when?
Okay, good question. Since when? Well, you know, one of the things that the authors of the book mention is, and it's actually, I was too young at the time to remember it, but, you know, 1968 was a pretty bad year.
You got that.
Okay? Yeah, so we have Bobby Kennedy gets assassinated, Martin Luther King gets assassinated, riots in the streets. They mentioned that in various cities there were up to 3 terrorist bombings a week from internal terrorists bombing in race riot protests. And yet, we think that our divisiveness today is worse than that. I don't think it was. It's just that that these events that were locally happening didn't make it to the national news in the way that we have today.
Try the Civil War.
Yeah, or the Civil War. Right?
Or
Exactly.
South, whatever you call it.
Yeah, it's a civil war. I'm sorry, I grew up in the North. It's not the war of northern aggression, it's the Civil War, right? The winners get to write the history, it's the Civil War. Yes, sir.
News seems to be entertainment. So you see what you want to see because you want to be entertained. You go to the movie. News today seems to be entertainment, and you see what you want to see, and you go to the movie that you want to see. And so if that's the way it gets monetized as an entertainment.
Yes. Yeah, in a sense you're right. It has become a form of entertainment in how it's presented, and it's designed in a way to keep the eyeballs on the screen.
Well, we're dealing, though, with the marriage of global news 24/7 and social media. And,
Yes.
And people, reposting what they heard on the news, but then we also have, for North Carolina, we have the person standing on their porch watching houses, flow by and things
Exactly.
like that. So I think that social media is feeding into, or maybe even shaping the global news cycle. I
think you're right. Yeah. Yeah. These are not parallel sorts of things. They are all sort of intertwined. Jennifer, do you have a comment?
Yeah, it just seems like people are looking at the news to feed what they already believe instead of to learn.
Yes.
And I feel maybe that's part of the problem.
Yeah. Are we interested in learning about what's happening, or is it just a matter of feeding into what we already think and believe?
Also, I think we're looking for immediate response. The whole
Yes.
idea that you talked about, what's happening in North Carolina, no matter what you do, you aren't going to fix that in 5 minutes.
Yes.
I mean, it's weeks and months to rebuild roads that are totally washed out.
Yes.
But we're looking for immediate response. So if somebody says, well, I didn't get help right now, then it's all over the news that nobody's doing it.
Yeah. Not to mention that you probably live in some holler back, where you can only get to it with donkeys right now, because the roads are totally washed out, right? Yeah, it takes time. And we want that immediate gratification, that immediate response that impacts. Yes, ma'am.
I think it's working, but no, it's okay. Also, I mean, you're talking about divisiveness, but I think it wasn't so long ago. I was a nurse working at the hospital during COVID, and at the very beginning, everybody was gathered around the hospital workers. I mean, we had parades and everything. And then as soon as the vaccine came out, oh boy, there was a shift, left, right. You're lying to us. You're not doing it. COVID's not real. This is that. And so it became this huge, all of a sudden going one way to completely going the other way, depending on what news media or whatever thing that you looked at.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that long ago that it was even, I think, more divisive.
Yeah, and I would even say that if you actually are even trying to get both sides by watching, one side versus the other in sorts of news outlets to kind of hear both perspectives, that can almost be even more exhausting, right? Because it's like, well, what do I believe? Because one says it's red, one says it's green. I can't tell the difference. How do I know? It becomes more exhausting. And, yes, ma'am.
Well, and also when you look at the history of news used to be owned, the newspaper, TV, radio used to be owned by small families. Then big companies came in, we can make a lot of money on this. 1980s is when it really shifted.
Yes.
And, thanks. Oh, okay. You can't hear me? So that's the other thing that's happened. And then when you get into social media, you get into what we call the yellow journalism and the grassroots.
Yes.
Everybody thinks there's a journalist, and now ethics. So that's the other problem is, as a journalist, you have these ethics code. But when everybody starts getting into it,
Yeah,
there
the
goes
ethics
the
goes out the window. That's exactly right. Yeah.
They hear.
Sorry?
Ask them if they can hear.
Can you all hear? Okay? Okay. Cool. So how do we break the cycle? And how do we recover hope? And which leads to the question of, what is hope? Right? If you were to define hope, what would it be?
The future.
Hmm?
The future.
Hope, the future. Okay, there's an aspect of the future in it.
An expectation.
Oh, an expectation. Okay. Okay.
Things will be better soon.
Things will be better soon. Okay? If I were to say to you, well, I hope I get a new bike for my birthday. My wife would say you don't need any more bikes. But what does that hope convey?
A wish.
Ah,
A self-centered wish.
oh, a self-centered wish. Interesting. Okay. Did I hear another comment? An expectation. Okay, okay. Yeah, and I think we have two definitions of hope that I want to distinguish between. And one is what I'm going to call, for better or for worse, the secular definition of hope, which is wishing that things will get better or wishing for something in the future. Okay? Which is very much a passive thing. Okay? I hope I get this. I mean, it's not totally in my control whether I get it. Okay? It's passive. Versus what I'm going to call biblical hope, which is more active, and the way that they define it in this book is creating signs pointing towards God's future. Creating signs pointing towards God's future. There's an aspect of expectation, but it's an expectation that involves personal involvement, not just passive, I hope something happens.
Do you think those two can merge? Can they merge together?
Can they merge together? Yes, I think they can.
I'm thinking in specific, in the Dust Bowl. I honestly believe that there was a whole nation that was living on hope at that point in time. And
Yeah.
it was both kinds of hope.
Both kinds of. They weren't just sitting around like, well, we'll hope it's going to rain. They were doing things about it to make sure that they could continue to survive in the midst of what they were facing. Good, good. So this is a quote. I found this quote really good from their book. They say, creating signs pointing toward God's future involves action. It is like going out and buying a new outfit and a hostess gift because you fully expect you're going to get invited to an awesome party this weekend and want to be ready. Okay. Compare that to the popular version of hope, which is akin to sitting alone in your apartment wishing someone would invite you to a party. Okay? I kind of like that. And you know, it kind of reminds me of one of Jesus' parables. Anybody have an idea which parable that might be? The wedding feast? Okay, and trimming the lamps, getting ready for, the bridegroom to come. One group is ready, another group isn't, right? It's kind of that aspect. And I think we see this sort of active hope in Scripture. And I want to look at a couple of scriptures. The first this is from Hebrews. For God is not unjust. He will not overlook your work and the love that you showed for his sake in serving the saints, as you still do. And we want each of you to show the same diligence so as to realize the full assurance of hope to the very end, so that you may not become sluggish, but imitators of those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. Do you see the active nature in this passage? To realize the full assurance of hope in this passage involves serving the saints and being imitators of those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. In Romans chapter 5, Paul says, therefore, since we are justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have obtained access to this grace in which we stand. And we boast in our hope of sharing the glory of God. Not only that, but we also boast in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not disappoint us, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. What I like about this passage is that it's like things don't have to be going well for you to have hope. In fact, it's oftentimes when things aren't going well that it allows you to build hope. Okay? It talks about, endurance, and endurance producing character, and character producing hope. You see the action that takes place there? One that they don't talk about in the book that I think is a really good example is in the Gospels, John the Baptist has been put in prison. And he sends messengers to Jesus to say, are you the one we've been waiting for? Or should we expect someone else? John's lost hope at that point. He's in the exhausted camp. And how does Jesus respond? Does he say yes? Or no? What does he say?
The blind can see, the lame can walk.
He says, you go back and tell John what you've seen. The blind see, the lame walk. What's the rest of it? Lepers are cleansed.
The dead shall be raised.
Okay, he lists all these things that are all actions pointing toward God's future reality. He doesn't say, hang in there, John, it's going to get better. Because it didn't for John. But he says, you go show him these things that you see happening. Okay? That's where your hope lies. We also see it in Luke chapter 24. We see two examples that are back to back. And they involve something that I think is a practical thing that we can do today to help build hope. And that has to do with meals. And so we see this example. Jesus has been crucified, he's been raised from the dead, and the disciples are beginning to hear about it. And there are these two disciples who are walking back home from Jerusalem to Emmaus, which is about 6 miles away. And one of them is named Cleopas, and we don't know who the other one is. I suspect it's Cleopas' wife, Mary. And they're walking along the road, and Jesus happens to come up to them, but they don't recognize him. And they're walking along, and he asks them, he said, what are you discussing with each other while you walk along? They stood still, looking sad. The one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place in these days? He asked them, what things? They replied, the things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. We had hoped. They've lost their hope. And so Jesus begins to explain to him about how the Messiah had to die and so on and so forth. And then it says as they came near the village in which they were going he walked ahead. This is like an eye test today. And I shouldn't have worn my contacts today. They were going on, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is nearly over." So he went to stay with them. And when he was at table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They recognize him in the breaking of the bread, when they sit down for the meal. Well, the very next story in Luke also talks about a meal. And that is, this is the disciples, the rest of the 12, or now the 11, are gathered in a room trying to make sense of all that's happened. And it says, while they were talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and terrified and thought they were seeing a ghost. And he said to them, "Why are you frightened? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and feet and see it is myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, he said to them, "Have you anything to eat?" And they gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. So we know this is always it's a proof that he wasn't a ghost, right? That he was actually real, that he ate in their presence. But I think there's something more to it in the fact that in the midst of their disbelief and in the midst of their lack of hope, he sits down and he eats. And I also think that it's probably no accident that the central ritual that we have as Christians that we partake of on a regular basis is a meal. Because when we sit down and have meals with people, barriers break down. Much better than they do over social media. And it's kind of ironic, I meant to get some photos to show, but I've been guilty of this. How many of you have been to a cool restaurant to sit down and first thing you do is take a photo of your meal and post it on social media, right? Okay? It's like, that's a fake meal. Because, right, you're showing people, hey, look, I'm having this wonderful meal, and guess what? You're not. Okay? So this idea that social media kind of becomes a false way of interaction, it's also a false meal. Right, when we post a meal on Facebook. The authors of the book, Nancy French, one of the things she points out is, her husband David French is a constitutional lawyer. He's pretty conservative, and he is fairly active on social media. And there was a lady that was quite aggressive towards him, always making bad comments. And he is fairly aggressive about blocking or muting people that make ugly comments. But his wife decided she would follow this person and just kind of learn more about her. And when COVID hit, she saw a post from this lady saying, "I'm running out of food." So she messaged her. And she said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "I live in New York. I'm disabled, I can't get out of my house, the food delivery services aren't working properly, I've been eating pancake mix for weeks." And Nancy said, "Can I get you food?" And this lady's like, "Why in the world would you do that?" Right? And so she ended up, it's kind of a long, drawn-out story, but she ends up finding a friend that puts her in touch with a service where she actually hires someone to go buy food for this person and deliver it to their home, right? And the lady calls her and says, "You wouldn't believe," and it's just a big celebration of all this food that she's gotten. And when she and her husband were in New York the next time, they went to visit her to have a meal. And she said, there is no agreement on opinion. We haven't changed her mind and she hasn't changed ours on how they view various issues. But they consider her a friend. But to the point they were able to go and meet with her, help her down the steps of her apartment building to go to the restaurant that's in the same complex and have a meal with her. And I thought to myself, how much would we change the culture of our divisiveness if we actually sat down and had meals with the people with whom we disagree? And we might see that they're not as demon-possessed as we happen to think they are through their social media posts, or as stupid as we think they might be through their social media posts. Has anyone ever done that?
Jesus.
Okay, we see Jesus doing it all the time, right? We talked a few weeks ago about one of the things about Jesus. Jesus liked a good party. Okay, he went to lots of parties. So much so that his critics called him a glutton and a drunkard. Okay? You got to go to a lot of parties for that to come out. Right? He eats with people all the time. Yes, ma'am.
I have several friends that I disagree vehemently with their views of what life is. But you heard me say I have several friends.
Yes. Yeah.
We don't always discuss our differences. We usually discuss our likeness and how we love each other.
Yeah. I have a friend I used to work with that is politically much different than me. But he's a devout Christian. I'm a devout Christian. And he'll often, if I've posted something on social media that he disagrees with, he may comment on it. But oftentimes he calls me. And he says, hey, I want to just talk about this. And we'll chat about it. And he'll be at the end, he'll be like, okay, I understand your position. You understand my position. I still don't agree with your position. But, he's like, you're still my brother. Right? It doesn't change. We have a relationship beyond just what we see, through Facebook.
I think that we've been married 56 years.
Mm.
Don doesn't agree with everything I say, and I don't agree with everything he says. So why should I think that all of my friends should?
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I like simplistic because my mind is simplistic, but if we're created for good works, I love where he says when you have opportunity, do good. And when you do that, not only does it solidify and build up your eternal hope, your biblical hope, but usually the reaction from the people that you help will also help the secular hope.
Yes.
Because you see that, and that's where you can really build some relationship. I think it ties to the action that you're talking about, and it keeps me off of social media. If you do that, not that I do that all the time, but when you have opportunity, and that kind of speaks to letting the Spirit move you as well. Try to have your eyes open for that opportunity.
I think it's important too to teach our children. I think that divisiveness is learned. I think it's something that's learned.
Oh yeah.
Case in point. So my best friend, she's Turkish, and I grew up with her, and not knowing that they were a different religion than me, I didn't really care when I was younger. And then 9/11 hit, and everybody was so mean to her, pushing her down the stairs, and I didn't understand why. I didn't understand that, and I think that's something that is learned,
Yeah.
And yeah.
Very true. Yes, sir.
So Rob, you've been real good at giving us all examples of putting on different lenses and seeing things with different eyes, at different time periods with different details, and this is really fresh for me. So as Scott was saying, he's kind of backed out of social media a little bit. I've been doing the same. It's a time zapper. We all know we spend so much time on there, but I've had a rough relationship with my mom, so I'm in the process of repairing that. Not this mom, my mom. So one of the things, so we met this past week, and just to make super long short, we do have disagreements. We're all at different places in our life. We all see different things. We all have different experiences. And kind of where people are trying to get everyone to believe the same things for politics or religion is, hey, here's the ground that I stand on, you need to be on the same ground, you need to be on the same level. This is just not how it works. We won't all see the exact same thing. And that's where my mom and I are kind of building that bridge of, okay, we don't see the same things, we don't believe necessarily the same things, we don't agree with the same things.
Yeah.
But my hope and my love for her is, that at the end of that day, I can still say, I love you for who you are, and I will see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's what I miss with our community and our, we could say with separation today. So I have hope for that to be restored and rebuilt throughout our nation and the world even. Yeah. And taking a step from social media, I have experienced more connection than that could have ever given me.
Yeah, yeah, very true, very true. Which leads to, what do we do about social media? And there's a spiritual practice that they recommend that I think it's also related to food, and that is we approach it with fasting. Okay? Fasting doesn't mean you necessarily give it up completely, but you are conscious and limit what you do and you take breaks from it because of the benefits that it has for you. And I would say biblical hope is an active practice of creating the kingdom of God in the here and now. And we need to be more about creating that sort of active practice in our lives, not only because of what it does for spreading the kingdom of God and the good news, but by helping to restore hope, not just in ourselves, but in those that we come into contact with. And meal sharing is one example of a practice that helps build biblical hope by breaking barriers, creating connection, and helping us become more like Jesus. Randy.
Another reminder for me is that, even in the church, we have different belief systems, different ways of thinking about things. And you would think that wouldn't be the case, but it certainly is the case and has been since the church began. And there's instruction about how we regard others and the way they see things. You accept the brother whose belief system allows them or doesn't allow them to do things that you're okay with. Yeah. And so there's not only in the secular sense, but in church thinking.
Absolutely.
How we deal with people that don't think like us.
Absolutely. 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 One last comment.
One last comment. A couple of things. I belong to the McKinney Lions Club, and I have a meal every week with people that half of us disagree with each other in politics, but we still try to do good works. And the second thing is, for those who were in first service, this just hope ties totally into what was talked about in first service this morning.
Yeah, agreed. So next week we're going to look at the final group, the cynic. And so two passages, one of my favorite passages, Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. Please read that. And also, if you get a chance, read the book of Jonah. Jonah's a cynic. God love him. God love him. We'll talk about that next week. Thank you all very much for your comments, participation, and sharing.